Hey Viv.
Hi, Ife.
So I've got a problem for you.
Hmm.
I've been going out of town more recently, and I've been coming back to rotting food in the fridge, which
Oh.
feels awful to throw out. Feels like it's bad for the climate, so turning to you for help.
Well, I think there's a lot of options, but something that I've gotten into recently is dehydrating my food for later.
Do you just like put them out in the sun and let them dry overnight? Like how does this work?
That's amazing. You could sell those like as bespoke sun-dried fruits. But no, I just use a dehydrator. You can also use an oven. You plug it in and it blows warm air over your sliced up fruits and vegetables and slowly dries it over like 3 hours.
That is so cool. I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
What is the funnest thing that you've ever dehydrated?
The weirdest thing I've ever dehydrated is cooked pasta. So you cook the pasta and then you dehydrate it, and then it looks like you just have what you started with. It just looks like dried pasta. But the upside is you add hot water and then it puffs up immediately.
I love this because I always thought it was a one-way street kind of thing. Well, that's awesome that you found something that really works for you. Personally, I don't think dehydrating is quite my thing, but I bet there are tons of other methods for keeping food for longer that I'd love to know about. And also, I think it would be helpful to know how this all fits in with the overall picture of climate change.
Good question. Let's ask an expert.
Hi, and welcome to the Keeping It Cool podcast. I'm Ife Huang.
And I'm Vivian Patterson.
Every episode, we surface stories about how individuals in our Bay Area communities are contributing to climate action.
My name is Robin Plutchok. I'm a program manager at StopWaste.
Vivian and Wendy talked to Robin to understand why food waste is a problem and what we can do to help.
StopWaste is a Alameda County public agency that does waste reduction, recycling, and energy efficiency programs for businesses, schools, and residents of Alameda County.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Stop Waste?
So I've always been interested in environmental issues. I was in the Peace Corps as an environmental educator, and prior to joining Stop Waste, I worked for an environmental consulting firm primarily on water resource issues. So when I found out about Stop Waste, I was excited to work for a public agency, to work for my local community, to work on issues that were accessible and also affected our local citizens and try to reduce waste. It seemed really exciting to me. It seemed like something that should be part of what we do.
On your website, we also noticed that there's a link for stopfoodwaste.org. Is that related to Stop Waste?
StopFoodWaste.org is our campaign website. So StopFoodWaste.org is a program of Stop Waste. So we have there on StopFoodWaste.org, we house our tips and tools, and we also have blog entries, and we regularly update it, and we promote things and send people to Stop Food Waste for more information. The campaign officially launched in 2017. So we have a good, I guess that's 5 years now of campaign.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've been trying to create a variety of tips and tools that hopefully will be helpful to a broad audience.
Why, in broad terms, is food waste such a problem?
Food waste is a problem because recent studies have shown that 35% of the US food supply is wasted. And a lot of that goes to landfill. In fact, about 95% of wasted food is landfilled. I mean, here in California and in the Bay Area, we do have curbside composting, and composting is great. We need to actually get all of those organics out of the landfill because once there's two sides to it. When we waste food, we are wasting all of the resources that go into making it. We're wasting the water, the energy, the transportation, the processing. So all of those inputs that go into our food to get them, to grow them, to process them, to get them to our homes are wasted. And then once that food is in the landfill, it produces methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas.
Wait, Wait, Vivian. Pause right there. Why is it worse for food to be in a landfill?
versus composting normally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when food is in the compost bin, it reacts with the oxygen in the air and produces CO2 rather than methane. But when that organic matter is in the landfill, it's buried under all of this other landfill and it is not able to react with any oxygen. And so then it produces methane, which is really bad. Methane is about 30 times worse than CO2.
I see. Okay, so CO2 is like the smart car, and then methane is the monster truck.
Right, exactly. So, just to recap, there's these two aspects of food waste that are problematic. There's throwing away all those resources, and there's also that organic matter getting into landfill and creating methane. Robin also mentioned that there are other problems related to wasting food.
Due to the COVID pandemic and the economic fallout, there's unprecedented hunger and food insecurity in the United States and locally. The Alameda County Community Food Bank recently posted that 1 in 4 have some level of food insecurity locally. So on one hand, we're wasting so much. On the other hand, there's unprecedented need and people are not getting nutrition that is needed. So it's a pretty big issue. And when you look at the food that is going to waste, before it even gets to the landfill, a recent study from the EPA posted that the greenhouse emissions of that wasted food are equivalent to 42 coal-fired power plants.
Wow.
So, and additionally, households are one of the biggest generators of food waste. There are systemic problems in creating food waste, but we as individuals also create food waste. So it's one of those places where there are things that can be done on a grand scale, but there's also things where we as individuals can make an impact.
That's really cool. I think that's like exactly what we're trying to target on this podcast. When you say households, how bad is it exactly? How bad is the waste from households?
30 million tons of food waste is from our homes. That's 37% of the total. And that is from a recent report. So food loss and food waste throughout the supply chain, 37% of it comes from our homes.
That's much higher than I expected. It feels like each individual household is small in isolation, but there's many households, so this starts to make sense.
Yeah, and if you think about, right now there's all these supply chain issues and we're hearing about the cost of food is growing quite a bit. There's a lot of inflation. And so the former number was that households waste approximately $1,600 in food each year. So an average household of 4 wastes about $1,600 each year just by wasting food. So it's the equivalent of like leaving 1 bag of your groceries in the parking lot when you buy. When you're leaving the grocery store with 4, you leave 1 in the parking lot. So it is significant.
Wow, that is really huge. So it's really clear that food waste is a big problem and we need to do something about it. But I had always assumed that the things that you can do are really high in either time or effort.
I think there's really simple things. Like one of the tools on our stopfoodwaste.org website is just an eat this first sign. And you can put it in your refrigerator and you can put it on your cupboard. So you just sort of like put the things that you know need to be eaten towards the front where you'll see them and sort of identify them. So it's not something that's super time consuming. It's just sort of being aware of what needs to be eaten first. The other thing is expiration dates. Like a lot of people don't use their senses. Expiration dates, aside from baby formula, they're not regulated. They're basically for stores, for inventory, for brands, for maximum freshness. So a lot of people will see a date that's passed and they'll automatically toss it. And basically our senses are designed to keep us alive and healthy. And so for most of us, we can just look at it. That milk didn't like automatically turn bad overnight. So just looking at your food and smelling it and getting to know it and say like, okay, the date was 2 days ago, but it still looks fine. And also just recognizing that food, if it has a little spot, it doesn't mean that you need to throw out the whole thing. There's a lot of times where people have this idea that food needs to be perfect and will discard the whole thing, sort of the baby with the bathwater, because one little part of it has softened or has got a little bruise or a spot. So, just sort of thinking about that, all the resources that went into this beautiful apple, cut it, or if it's starting to get soft, cut it up and put it in your oatmeal or cook with it. It's still useful, it's still flavorful, it's still nutritious. So making sure that we can identify that and just recognize it.
This is a tangent, but I have dabbled in growing vegetables before, and I feel like the amount of time and effort it takes to produce a cherry tomato, like if everybody would just go and try to grow one apple or one carrot, you would know how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into it. And obviously on a commercial scale, it's a little different, but like you literally see the thing grow and you're like, wow, it spent 28 days nurturing this thing to like get it to survive.
Yeah, I've had the same experiences. I'm getting a little better, but I've sort of also chosen the foods that I seem to be more successful at growing.
Yeah, these tips that you've shared seem not very hard or time consuming. You mentioned using a eat this first sign, trusting your senses instead of expiration dates, and being all right with imperfect foods. I think just knowing that these are things that you can work on is really helpful.
It is about mindfulness to some degree, like looking at where we are wasting food in our homes. If you have aspirational kale eating, then you just are wasting it every week, and you just see the yellowing kale in your refrigerator, then let's think about, like, are you really actually going to eat that kale? But the other thing to really think about is, like, what are the things that have more impact? So if you are wasting milk or dairy or meat, the embedded resources in those food items are more impactful. So if you're going to start with one corner, you might think about where the more embedded resources are.
Yeah. Our first podcast episode was about how your diet impacts climate change. And that's definitely something that a lot of people seem to have taken away from that, of if there's like 3 things on this buffet table and it seems like it's going to get thrown away by the end of the meal, you go for like the beef, the cheese, the dairy, because that's all stuff that took a lot more resources to put into it. So I think that totally makes sense to just sort of incorporate that into your own shopping and cleaning out your fridge. Along those lines, what do you think is the biggest challenge to getting people to implement these new habits?
I think one of the challenges is a lot of people think they don't waste food. And so just acknowledging that people do waste food is part of the awareness.
That totally makes sense. I think that is definitely the first battle. Doing this audit yourself, realizing that there's always improvements to be made.
We have a tool on our website called the Fridge Reality Check, and a video that you can watch that sort of walks you through how to audit your own fridge and cupboard and freezer and determine how much you're wasting. And we work with schools as well. In the past, students have brought home the Fridge Reality Check and worked with their families and seen how much and the types of food that are going to waste in their household, in their kitchens.
Okay, Vivian. So after hearing this, I went to stopfoodwaste.org and I found the Fridge Reality Check and I did it myself.
Oh, awesome. Did you find out anything interesting?
I honestly, I feel like some of the questions were just too real. Like, one of them asks you to check off why food items went bad. And one of the options was just, I didn't like them, which I felt like was just the reality with most of my leafy greens.
Hey, at least you know.
Yeah, but it also offers some great tips for each of those reasons. So, for example, I did have quite a few foods where I just forgot that I had bought them. So having a eat me first sign would have been a great thing for those situations.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So yeah, I guess I gotta adopt some new grocery and fridge practices.
Yeah, I think we all do. So you're not alone there. And Wendy also brought up with Robin that large unexpected pandemics could influence individual behavior at the grocery store.
we all got taken for a huge unexpected ride with COVID, and many people cooking at home that weren't ever cooking at home. And so that probably was kind of an increase in the amount wasted, is my guess. So even if you're doing these prevention programs, you can't anticipate what other factors are going to cause people to shift and waste food suddenly.
Definitely.
Following up on that, I think a lot of us, especially in the early pandemic, when getting groceries was a big challenge. I think a lot of us, when we did go to the grocery store, were much more conscious about what was on our list. And so even just making a grocery list about shopping your fridge and cupboards, like, oh, I already have this. I don't really need to buy another 2 jars of tomato sauce, or, shopping our fridge and our cupboards first and then going to the grocery store. I think that's really important. Also, since a lot of folks did buy extra, making sure that we're using those things, looking at what you have and then figuring out what meals you are going to make using your existing food and then supplementing there. That's a good way of doing that.
The temptation is to get too much at one time, but I hate that because then I lose track of what's where. I think the main thing is not losing track of what you have. It's sort of sad that we have so much excess that we don't even know, what we're wasting.
Some people will just put a scrap of paper on the fridge and jot down what's in there, or have a whiteboard that they kind of use. I've also have a colleague who he and his partner use a grocery app. So they have what's in their cupboard and then they can share the list between them. So I think that there's a lot of different ways, low tech and high tech, that can help us with tracking those things. Those are just some of the ways I've heard people feel that they've been on top of that. But yes, I am with you on the grocery shopping and being like, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to come back here. Like, who knows what's going to happen next week? So maybe I'll buy 2 of these. But also just trying to sort of feel like things are okay.
These are some really great tips for staying organized when you're planning to grocery shop. I feel like I do a decent job at that. I like to inventory my kitchen. It's like very soothing. But I feel like the biggest struggle that I have is afterwards. I've done the grocery shopping. I've made some sort of plan for most of it, but sometimes unexpected things happen. Like you go out and, you turn around and your basil that you bought is now completely slimy and completely done only after 2 days of being in the fridge. So I don't know if you also have some tips for that.
So, I think we're working in that direction as well, to try to look at the two sides of it, like the people who are wasting, and try to give them tips to, I mean, I say the people, we're all wasting food, right? Let's admit it. Like everyone wastes food. It happens. So how can we lessen the amount of food that we're wasting? And then also look at how we can keep our food longer and fresher to feed our families.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. And even just things like storing your cilantro or your herbs in like a glass of water. I put a loose plastic bag over it and put it in the fridge. I have cilantro that's 4 weeks old and that is still edible. It has not turned totally slimy. It's kind of exciting. Or, storing strawberries in a sealed container. There's a lot of different suggestions on how to store strawberries, but I've had a lot of luck with storing it in a sealed container with a towel. And then I've had strawberries for well over a week that have stayed fresh that way. Some of these foods that are more precious, I feel like avocados, pears, there's certain foods that are expensive and then it feels like they're there and they are hard. And then the next time you look at them, they're really soft. So looking at some of the ways to store those, I sort of check my avocados when they start to get kind of soft. I put them in the refrigerator, but I want them to be ripe before I put them in the refrigerator. So that does take a little bit of time and a little attention.
That's a really great suggestion for fruits that are a little bit more expensive. Like I always am so sad when I have an avocado that is 2 days past when I should have eaten it because it feels like such a waste. How do you feel about freezing stuff?
The freezer is really great. Freezing is sort of like putting a hold on the freshness of your food. And the biggest trick with freezing it is labeling it with the date and what's in it, because there's nothing worse than like opening something up, thinking it's something and then finding out that it's not that. And I've heard that one of our chef partners has said that painter's tape is really good because you can just put it on different packaging and just write what it is and it comes off easily. And so, yeah, freezing food is a great technique. Your future self can be very thankful that you cooked previously. And I even freeze pizza. We'll buy pizza and, my kids only want cheese pizza and we want something different. And so we'll buy 2 pizzas and then freeze them.
Also,
and then again, my future self is very grateful that I have pizza. Our favorite pizza, just needs to be heated up. So those are some of the tips I really use in my household.
What about dairy products?
I have frozen cream cheese. When I buy like a block of it, I have frozen it before, and that's worked fine. I have not tried sour cream. I think some of the milk products are fine if you're going to cook with them later, but they sometimes separate. I'm not the expert on that one, but I've definitely frozen cream cheese.
Can sour cream go bad? It's like already sour, right?
everything can go bad, Vivian.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
I think sour cream and yogurt, they have a really pretty good shelf life because they're already fermented, but
Fair enough.
But yeah, if you are going to freeze things, I think it does make sense to put it in smaller portions because you don't want to freeze a giant vat of soup because A, it takes too long, and then if you wanted to serve it out, it would take a really long time to heat it up again. So I do think it helps to have a smaller amount of it.
Like if I buy a nice baguette, I'll chunk out pieces of it and freeze it for later, or even bagels. Bread freezes really well.
Yeah, it really does.
We do have a food storage guide that shows what should be stored on the counter, what does better in the fridge, which items don't play well together. Like certain fruits emit ethylene, which causes other fruits to ripen faster. So just we have a tip that storing an apple with your potatoes keeps them from sprouting, but storing an onion with your potatoes causes them to sprout faster. I mean, there's science behind so many of these things that it's kind of fascinating. It's sort of making it a game to see which of these tips you can try out and see, does it work? I'm going to store some strawberries this way and some strawberries this way and see, which ones do look fresher longer.
It's also important to know which vegetables have a shorter shelf life. Like we get a box from our CSA and we just know that we need to use the kale a little bit sooner than other vegetables. Like we're not worried about carrots, we're not worried about cabbage, but don't forget that kale, just got to get that in there. Also using every bit of the food and not wasting the peels and stuff for stock. I know that's something that people will do. You're getting the maximal value out of the food this way.
Croutons too. You have that bread when your bread goes stale. They're so good. They will never make it to your salad.
There are so many things you can do with stale bread because you can make French toast, you can make basically
Stuffing.
bread pudding, stuffing. Yeah, so many good things to do with bread.
Bread is good. We love our carbs. What can we say?
Yeah. One question that I had is, how do you handle larger events? If you're having a potluck at your house, there's bound to be way too much food. Do you have any strategies to handle that?
One thing you can do is send your friends and family home with leftovers. You can save your yogurt tubs or your different containers and say hey, this is way more soup than I'm going to eat. Here, take this. And just make sure that that's part of your, party ethic, I guess, is to send friends and family home with leftovers.
We kind of address not having enough time or being too busy and also hosting big events. Do you see other resistance to implementing these changes that could help you reduce waste?
A lot of people think that because they compost, they don't need to prevent food waste. It's a huge guilt alleviator, thinking well, I didn't eat it. Well, I'm going to compost it. So that's good. And it is good. It is definitely better to compost than to put it in the landfill. However, as we mentioned, all of the resources that went into creating your food, to growing it, to getting it to you, that you put into cooking it and preparing it, they're all lost when you put that in the compost. So it's definitely better to try to prevent that wasted food in the first place. I mean, it happens. It totally happens to all of us. But I think trying to sort of get out of that mindset is a big step. There's a lot of different things. You mentioned time earlier. A lot of people think they don't waste food. And then there's also just cultural reasons, like having a full fridge is good. I feel better when my fridge is full, or I want to buy the best price. So I'm going to buy bulk, even though I'm not going to use all of that. Or going to the farmer's market and being enamored with the purple and the yellow cauliflower, and how many cauliflowers I think there's various pathways to over purchasing. Or if you are food insecure, sometimes you don't have a choice about what food you are getting and what quantities. So I think all of these are pieces of it. It's just teasing those out over time and recognizing which of those apply to us.
That totally makes sense. And it sounds like step one is being mindful of which of these traps you may fall into. Definitely been there with both Costco trips and farmers market where you're like, well, these both look good. So I definitely feel very seen.
Yeah, I think I resonated with what you were saying about the cultural feeling that you have to have the full fridge. But that's a good thing to balance out the wanting to be thrifty and doing the over shopping thing versus if you didn't overbuy, then you'd actually save more money because you're not wasting that
Definitely.
purchase.
I mean, yes, if you do buy in bulk and some of it goes to waste, you haven't saved money.
Exactly.
Some people don't like leftovers. That's another thing you asked earlier about challenges we find. Some people say they don't like leftovers, and I'm like, oh, leftovers, thank you. Does this mean I don't have to think about my next meal? Awesome. I mean, in trying to incorporate leftovers, if you have leftover rice, can you make it into another meal that is something different? And thinking about strategy there, it doesn't have to be the same thing. You can add these herbs or add this other thing to make it into a different meal. Single person households, it's really hard. They don't sell one celery stick most places, So how do you make the most of your food when most of the time you have to buy more of it than you can actually use? And in that case, that is a challenge. And there's certain strategies, but not all of them are going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
I love that the concepts that you're sharing with us are so simple and straightforward. It's like the fact that you can't hide the fact that we're all wasting food. You don't need anything fancy. Just use your senses, understand yourself, be mindful. These are all great lessons.
Don't buy that kale if you're not going to eat it.
Don't buy the kale. That's right. No, you can buy the kale as long as you follow through.
I did have some kale the other day that was looking a little limp, and I just trimmed the edges and stuck it in a jar of water, and it perked right up. It was a beautiful bouquet. And then I cooked it because it was on my counter. So, I'm trying to implement these as well. And my colleagues and I have a lot of the tips and tools and pictures you see on our website are things from our own kitchens where we've actually implemented them, in our household. So hopefully some of those will be appealing.
What's next for Stop Waste and Stop Food Waste? It sounds like making this information more broadly accessible is currently on the agenda.
The Stop Food Waste campaign is targeted towards Alameda County residents, but stopfoodwaste.org is available to anyone with internet. And yeah, we're really trying to sort of expand the reach of our food waste reduction campaign. And we're working with businesses, we're working with food recovery organizations, we're working with public agencies and local city governments so they can also share those messages with their communities. I think food waste is something we all do, and it is one of the most accessible ways we can have an impact on our footprint. We'd love to be able to go out and be where people are making decisions about their food at the grocery stores and farmers markets and other places where people are making that decision and really working towards thinking about food waste prevention at the point of purchase.
Like a little angel on your shoulder being like, no judgment, but are you going to eat that for real? That sort of thing. I think that would be great. I kind of came into this being like, there's probably one thing that's like best for everybody to do. But as you mentioned before, everyone's lifestyle and diet are so different that it makes sense that here's maybe like the 10 easiest things that you could do and just start playing around with those and see what works for you.
Yes. Using what you have, store your food in a way that makes it last, and, try to find ways to eat your leftovers or freeze them for later.
I love a good leftover.
Future you thanks you. We're very fortunate to live in California that has strong climate change initiatives. we've talked mostly about the household level, but there are initiatives across the state and definitely being implemented locally that are going into effect as of January 2022.
Here, Robin is talking about California Bill SB 1383, which will require Californian individuals and businesses to cut organic waste by 75% by 2025.
Thanks for all of your great tips about grocery shopping and kale and making croutons. I think we're excited to put those into practice. Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Food waste prevention, stopping food waste really, really speaks to me, is that it's something that all of us can do. We don't need to put solar panels. We don't need to buy a new car. It doesn't require money. It doesn't require technology. It's just something that can be done in our daily practice. I think when we look at climate change, it can be really overwhelming and we can feel really small, but knowing that there's a place where we can have an impact in our actions is really important.
Check out stopfoodwaste.org for resources like the fridge reality check and more tips and tricks. Thank you to Robin Plutchok for putting food waste into perspective and sharing these great resources.
Thank you to Stephanie Lai, who designed our logo, and Deep Talk for the original music. And lastly, this wouldn't be possible without our wonderful team here at the Keeping It Cool podcast. That's Vivian Patterson, Wendy Cho, Vidya Ravi, and me, Yifei Huang. Stay tuned for our next episode.